Hey, what's up, guys? Today we'll look to do some simple mainframe test automation using Zowe-CLI and Mocha JavaScript to demonstrate test-driven development and behavior-driven development testing concepts. Let's first have a look at our demo requirement and story details. So as Arnell, I want to update a file containing a quote from Albert Einstein so that it shows the correct author. We've created two acceptance criteria for this demo requirement. The first is a new response file is generated containing the quote with the correct author, and an empty input file produces an empty response file. Examples. So we've created three given when then examples, which will be the basis of our test cases. So let's quickly go over them. Given an input file containing Albert Einstein's quote, when I run my batch job, then the batch job processing completes successfully with a return code of 0. Given an input file containing Albert Einstein's quote, when I run my batch job, then a new output file is generated replacing all occurrences of who said this with Albert Einstein. And given an input file, when I run my batch job, then an empty output file is generated. Let's quickly have a look at what the input file looks like. So the aim of this requirement is to replace who said this with Albert Einstein. The idea here is to start writing test automation scripts even before we start writing our code. Let us now proceed to demonstrate how we can easily create a mainframe test automation project using Zowe-CLI and the Mocha testing framework. Let us start by creating a folder for our test project. Next, let's initialize our project by doing an npm init. Let's keep all the default values for simplicity. Right. Next, let's install the dependencies that we'll be using for this project. So we will need Mocha chai, to do the assertions. We'll also need the HTML report generator so we can view our test results easily. So next, let's open up our test project in Visual Studio Code. There's our newly created project, add it to our workspace, and there is our package.json file. At the moment, we can see that the dependencies are there, the chai dependency and the HTML reporter, but we don't have any tests specified, so we'll just update that to point to Mocha and our HTML reporter. Let's save the project. Next, we'll start creating folders to hold our input test data. Let's create another folder to hold our output for test evidence. And finally, let's create a folder that will hold our test scripts. Next, let's proceed to create our test data. Test input data will need a empty input file for our empty test case scenario, and we'll also need an input file for our success scenario. So we have prepared this earlier. I'll just paste that over. So the idea is to replace "who said this" with Albert Einstein. Let's save that. So you've got our input, we've got our output folder. Next, we'll create our test script. So let's name this app test.js. We've also prepared earlier a template of the test script that we'll be using for this project. Let's quickly go over what this does. As mentioned earlier, these are based on our given, when, then examples. So we've got 3 examples, so we'll have 3 test cases. So the first test case is about running the batch job and expecting a return code of 0. So what this does is it executes a Zowe command to upload our input file that we created earlier into the mainframe, and then submits a JCL on the mainframe, sends the output to our output folder, and then checks the output for the return code of 0. The next test case is about checking that the program has updated the input file with the correct author. So what this does is it downloads the output from the JCL into our output folder, name it code_out.txt, and then checks that output file for the string Albert Einstein. And finally, our last test case is to check that the input file, if the input file is empty, that our expected response file would be empty as well. So what this does is it uploads our input file, the code_empty.txt file we created earlier, into the mainframe, and then resubmits the JCL, sends the output to our output folder, and then checks that the output file is empty. And that's it. We've created our mainframe automation test project. We are now ready to run our test automation. For the first run, let's simulate a scenario where our JCL and program haven't been coded or created yet. So in this script, we are intentionally pointing our JCL lib to a member called xxx, which doesn't exist. Similarly, our test case 3 points to xxx, doesn't exist. So let's run our test automation. So obviously all the tests should fail because our code in JCL is not available yet. So we can see from the tests that it started to fail the submit job. Yep, we're getting a 404, which means it's not found. here. Members not found. There you go. And let's have a look at the test results. So there it is. So all our test case have failed with a timeout error because both the program and the JCL is not available yet. Alright. So next, let's simulate a situation where we've created a program and a JCL, but let's intentionally introduce some bugs or defects and let's see what happens. So let's point our test JCL lib to the proper JCL library. So let's do that. File JCL. Let's save this. Let's go on the mainframe and let's verify that file JCL exists on this PDS library. Right. So it exists. So this is our JCL on the mainframe. It's executing a program called file Java on Unix server. Let's try to open that. Okay, so let's change this program to intentionally make it fail. So this will cause it to fail because this will not match our expected output for test case number 2. And let's also try to force a record. Extra record. So it should fail our empty test scenario as well. Save that. And back to our script. Check that it's all good. And let's run our automation script for a scenario where our developer has already coded a program in JCL but expects some bugs or defects. Let's run it now. Let's have a look at the output. So you can see that the output from the mainframe is getting downloaded into our local machine. Okay, so the job completed successfully. You can see that the return codes are all zeros, but we can see that there are still some errors here. So let's have a look at our report file. Let's refresh this. So we can see that test case number 1, where it has a return code of 0, has passed. So we've got one pass in there from our report summary, and then we've got 2 failures. So test case number 2, where it checks the output file to contain the correct author named Albert Einstein, failed with an assertion error because Arnel Einstein was on our output instead of containing Albert Einstein. And test case number 3 failed as well because we were expecting an empty response file, but our test automation project found an extra record written on the output file. Cool. So just like what we've expected, So finally, for our last run, let's simulate a scenario where we are retesting the defect fix. In this case, all we have to do is click a button to run all 3 test cases. We don't need to recreate the test data manually. Run the batch job to test that the fix works. So let's go and proceed to fix our program. So let's put Albert Einstein in there, and then let us remove that extra record that is being written on the output file by the program. Save the program, and then let's run our test automation again. See, there we go, the job is run. So the job was completed successfully. There's Albert Einstein. So the program has updated it correctly. So now it's processing the test case 3 scenario for an empty test file, input file. Right, so automation job was completed. Let's refresh this. All right, so we now can see 3 passes, 0 failures. All our test cases passed. And there you go. We've successfully tested and retested our test cases and scenarios without having to manually recreate test data, submit jobs, and validate results. So with Zowe-CLI and open source tools like Mocha testing framework, there's really no reason not to start doing automation on the mainframe. It's really a simple and painless process that could make our development process a bit faster and more efficient. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care and see you again next time. Cheers. Bye.